A very good evening to everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Second and Saints. I'm John Hendricks alongside Ross Jackson, coming at you to talk some more Saints. Obviously, it's draft month, Ross. But obviously, before we get into all that fun stuff, I know, right? The Arsenio, we're in rare form tonight, guys. So you're just gonna have to just deal with it. But man, Ross, let's as always, before we dive into all the fun stuff, man, how was your Easter?
Oh, it was great. It was great, man. Relax, chill. It was really, really nice. Didn't have a ton going on, and everything. So it was a cool, just like chill, recharge kind of weekend. How about you?
It was good, man. Got to spend time with the family and all that good stuff. And so we had a really good time, man. It was just one of those things. And then back to school. And then, we got this severe weather that canceled school. So,
Right.
Kids go back and then they're back at home tomorrow. So it's all that funness. But, it's almost, we're winding down on school. So that's the good news. But, as that winds down, football picks up a good bit and such. So, but end of the month, man. Draft, it's coming. I mean, dude, we're less than 3 weeks away now. I mean, this is just
Amazing.
It's getting to the nitty gritty. And so, I mean, we've talked about stuff ever since the beginning when we talked about the offseason, we talked about free agency, the Saints, what they're going to do. And that's really what the bulk of the show tonight is going to be about. But again, let's touch on, a couple of things that's happened since we last were on. So let's start with Charlie Smyth, kicker that they got from Ireland, right? Very interesting interview. I think it's something, he's a really cool story. If you haven't seen the interview, check it out on Second and Saints. But man, this guy is really intriguing, I would say. And look, they got him on the international pathway program and such. And so that's why it's a 3-year contract. And so he's obviously in here to try to compete and take it, but really interesting path. Talk a little bit more about Charlie Smyth and maybe what your expectations are for him.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. He's a former goalkeeper playing soccer, so the other football.
Real
Being
football,
a guy
right?
the guy coming in from a down goalkeeper, and then decided he wanted to take the opportunity to maybe learn a little bit more, figure out what else he could do, and then like the idea of the path of American football, and then kind of work through it. Sent DMs to the NFL UK, wrote letters, did all of it, and then eventually this past year was the inaugural season or the inaugural class of Irish athletes in the IPP, the International Player Pathway. And so he gets into the program, does some, kicking at the combine, does some, kicking before then over at USF down in South Florida, where Darren Rizzi and Phil Galliano went and got a look at him. Darren Rizzi kind of talked to him, coached him up, gave him some things to work on, all that. And then he showed up at the Saints facility on a pro day visit, gets signed to the team, and now he gets an opportunity to compete. And John, I think for another year, we're going to be telling people all training camp, we did it last year, I think we're going to be doing it again. Hey, this is a legitimate kicker competition that should be taking place for the New Orleans Saints during camp this year.
Yeah, look, I loved his leg. I mean, I like Blake Grupe's leg coming out of college. I mean, he was doing, booting 60+ yarders with ease, relative ease. But again, there's something to this guy. And, I think what's interesting about him is that, he was asked about, some of the things, that feedback of and I think you might have asked this question about some of the things that he was talking about where he needs to improve. And it was just some little things to tweak that's going to make him kick a little bit quicker, get the balls off quicker and stuff like that. And so, look, I think it's a good thing for competition, right? And we've talked plenty about Blake Grupe, right? And like I pointed out, he went from last year to finishing up college to going immediate into draft prep and to doing all this stuff. And then now he's actually had an off season. And so he's going to be well rested. And then he's got the new challenger. And so this is a what have you done for me lately league. And so I'm really interested to see what he does. But these international players, they have certain rules to them, where they can have like roster exemptions and all that stuff, usually is what happens. But I mean, I think, what he's going to bring to the table should be really interesting if he can learn some stuff and the new kickoff rules. I mean, this could be advantageous for the Saints, but it's one of those things that we're gonna get excited about a kicker battle right now when the draft is coming. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see that in Cali take place and hopefully get a little bit more look at rookie camp too, and
Mhm.
get our first exposure to him. So it'll be fun, but that's not the only real news that they had. They also signed another linebacker, right? So they had Willie Gay Jr., but now they add Khaleke Hudson of the Commanders, formerly of the Commanders. This is a
Mhm.
really intriguing ad. And it was actually NOLA.com's Matt Paris. Shout out to him for pointing
Yeah.
this out. The Saints have more of the Commanders 2020 draft class than the Commanders actually do. That was a really crazy thing.
Yeah.
Matt used to cover the Commanders or the Washington football team, all that craziness too. But Khaleke Hudson, this is another guy that's going to compete for playing time. But he also is a good special teamer. Your thoughts on Hudson?
Yeah, no, I think he's going to be a good asset for this team in terms of figuring out, where they want to go, what they want to do over on special teams. Because, as you and I have discussed quite a bit, they lost a lot of special teamers on expiring contracts. They haven't brought back guys like Ty Summers and Ryan
Mm-hmm.
Connolly and Andrew Dowell and others. I mean, these are opportunities here there's an opportunity there for a guy like Khaleke Hudson to step in and have that role. And even a guy like Zach Bond, who a lot of people pay attention to the departure of Zach Bond because of what he contributed as a pass rusher toward the end of the season. But before any of that, and even in addition to all of that, he was a core special teamer for this team. And I think
Yep.
the thing that's going to be really interesting to watch too is how the new kickoff rule impacts players' ability to be able to make rosters as special
Huge.
teamers. I did ask Khaleke a little bit about how he feels about the kickoff rule. He's excited to see, first of
Yeah.
all, kick returns back in the game, but it's got to be a lot of fun for him too, as a chase him down and tackle kind of a guy. Like, that's his game. And you get a situation here now to where you're going to see a lot of teams. They're not necessarily going to be super worried about getting the bigger guys out there now. They're going to want speed out there. So
Yep.
if you can play speedy and make tackles, that's what's going to get you out on the field. And that is 6'1", 6 foot, 220-pound Khaleke Hudson to a T, a speedy guy that can move around and get to places in a hurry, and who's a pretty solid tackler in the meanwhile.
Yeah, and let's not forget they still have DeMarco Jackson on the roster, and
Mm-hmm.
Nephi Sewell's coming off the ACL injury, and so that'll be something to watch too. But I think that depth at that position now, you looked at it a little bit, and you lost Bond. It's like now you say, okay, it's a little bit better and
Yep.
such. And so I'm really excited about Hudson. This is a guy that went in for the Commanders last year, ended up finishing with 70 plus tackles. He's a guy that is going to play probably different positions, but he said definitely will is where he's going to
Mm-hmm.
pin in as far as right now. So another one of those just to be excited about. And it's again moves that don't really set the world on fire, right? But on the surface, but it matters in the grand scheme of things. And you look at the return teams, like you said, that it's going to be interesting how you shape up your return team versus your kick team. And you mentioned some of the lighter players, and it's going to invoke a little bit more speed into it and make it a little
Yep.
bit more exciting and such. And so I don't think it's a bad thing how this is going to go about. And so guys like, Rashid Shaheed should be chomping at the bit because he's always
Oh my
one little
gosh.
step away from
Yeah.
breaking it. And so I'm excited about stuff like that. And so it'll be fun because, again, you mentioned Darren Rizzi and of course, Phil Galliano, but I think they have a leg up here in the special teams. And it's also going to figure out how they might draft a little bit and how they even get undrafted players this year. You
Mm-hmm.
might see a little bit more at certain positions. You might then in traditional, you're always going to have as many offensive linemen. You're going to have a lot of wide receivers. But I remember something that Rizzi talked about in one of the drafts is that he gets really excited when he finds out that players have a background and have played special teams before, and so that's obviously going to bode well for their scouting process and trying to find some of those guys. But, you know, the bottom line is the Saints are about to be here for the draft. They've got 9 picks at their disposal right now, 14 and 45. Those are the big ones. 14 is the big one that obviously we're paying attention to. Will they trade up? Will they trade back? Right. It's all that fun stuff. But what we're talking about tonight, and we did this, and if you guys are familiar with the tier ranking system, let's just hop into it, Ross, is we went and ranked the positions of needs for the Saints. Now, Ross, I'll let you kind of talk about yours because I made my own. And the best part about this is that we didn't see this until, like right now and stuff about
Mhm.
who's doing what. And so really fun debate. So Ross, take yours away. We can start by tier. We can start by position, what maybe you thought about something, or we could just compare them.
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'll do kind of like a little bit of a rundown of like my philosophy behind the
Sure.
tiers. Because what I basically did was that I took the tiers S and A and I used those. And people that are unfamiliar, like S tier is kind of like the pinnacle, top tier, boss level, like whatever it might
Right.
be. And then A tier is obviously the most important. So I use S tier as like the must absolute need to address positions. A tier was the, positions that need addressing. And so I kind of put those together as the biggest team needs, S and A. And then I use B and C as a means of like looking at positions that maybe don't necessarily fall under the need ranking or kind of fall under the need ranking, but it's really just about like if you can find the right addition here, it can change a lot of things for the position, a lot of things for the team. And then D for me was kind of where, the team was mostly set, didn't need to address. But then I kind of ordered these purposefully with a couple of positions at the end that are like, but you still might want to look ahead to the future in terms of what you can
Sure.
add there. So that was kind of my thinking behind all these. So when it came to the S tier, I put this tier maker that we're using like broke things out as like a left tackle, right tackle, left
Right.
linebacker, right, blah, blah, blah. We'll kind of glaze over
Mm.
some of that language and use meaningful language. But I put both tackle spots up at one, along with left guard. I still think that the Saints have a need on the interior. Even if James Hurst is, makes it through camp and is back with the team and all those other things, I just think that those are spots where the Saints need to address. So offensive line being the big piece, but specifically tackle and then left guard, because center and right guard are pretty much locked up. Um,
Right.
the next kind of big needs for me were wide receiver. So this is getting to the A tier, wide receiver and defensive tackle. I just look at both of these as spots where the Saints need to add some talent here, and they could add talent in a variety of different ways. Wide receiver, they could do it with an X receiver. They could do it with a yards after catch receiver. Defensive tackle, they can get another penetrating pass rusher like another Brian Brzee. They could go for a little bit more of a run stopper to replace Malcolm Roach, kind of find that Malcolm Brown that they haven't been able to find.
Mm.
So they traded him away years ago to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then when we get to kind of B and C here, we're getting to the positions where it's like, okay, there's a little bit of need, but here's an opportunity for you to really be able to just kind of bolster and build your team up. Edge rusher and strong safety are right there. Those are probably needy positions, not the neediest, but needy positions. Strong safety, of course, being one of them. I believe very strongly that Jonathan Abram is probably at least the in-house favorite right now to take over next to Tyrann Mathieu, at least to start, but they could certainly bring in some talent there. And then when we get to C tier, I've got running back and tight end. And then I threw punter in here, John. And the only reason why I
Mm.
put punter in is because the Saints like to have two punters. They like to have two kickers just so they can kind of rotate these guys during training camp. But then also like maybe they saw what they wanted to see from sort of the experimental punter, right? And Lou Headley and things not, Dennis Allen told us right off the bat, like his punts are not going to look like the punts that you expect punts to look like. Or maybe they decided after seeing that they wouldn't mind getting a guy whose punts look like the punts that you think the punts are supposed to look like. And so I could see the Saints potentially bringing in some competition, but if nothing else, they're still going to bring in another leg over there. Every other position, free safety, cornerbacks, looking at the secondary there, center, right guard, which we mentioned were pretty set. Fullback, they have a nice little competition there with like your more traditional fullback versus your more athletic fullback in Adam Prentice and Xander Horvath, respectively. I put the two outside linebacker spots or kind of the coverage, the strong side linebacker spots on there. Kicker, they've got a pair of kickers. Those are all my ones where it's like you're strong there, you don't really have to address. But I did save middle linebacker, which we're just going to call Mike linebacker for right now, as well as quarterback for the end here in this tier, because I do think that looking for your potential future at both of those positions could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think some people might look at this quarterback thing and might blow a gasket too. You never know, but
I'm not. I
I,
put quarterback at the end of the tier. That way, it was like it's the least sure of them all because
Right.
like, you've got the guy for 2024, probably 2025,
Right.
but you don't have your future at the quarterback
Right.
position right now. And so that's why I put that one at the very, very end. Not because it's where they're most set, it's where they're maybe least set because of the lack of long-term vision there right now.
Well, and to your point, I mean, we've talked about this. They're committed to Derek Carr. That's why we
Yeah.
told people they're not going to draft Jaden Daniels, and Jake Hayner's going to get an opportunity. They're going to see, what they have in Jake to give him the backup shot. But Nathan Peterman's going to be probably, as of right now, third string. I think that's in a perfect world what they're looking at. And so again, I agree with you on the quarterback side. I kind of went similar. And of course, what I was thinking is I grouped like the offensive tackles, offensive
Hmm.
guards, or, what all that type of stuff together, linebackers and safeties. So I'm with you. I think the tackle spots are the most pressing needs, right? And you look at it just simply because of Ryan Ramczyk, that is concerning. And then Trevor
Yep.
Penning, you don't know what you have, but also at the same time, they got to figure this out really quickly. And it's not a
Hmm.
situation where you can just sit here. It's either he's going to be the guy or he's not going to be the guy. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
so, but with Ramczyk, I think that's a lot more of a concern. And look, they have guys, we've talked about guys like Landon Young, or if they bring like a Cam Irving, I just don't think they're set between now and the next couple of years at that particular position with Ramczyk's health and that knee.
Hmm.
It's not a thing that's going to just get magically better. This is only going to get worse, right? Or,
Right.
they're just going to manage it and such. But I think that's why you look at offensive tackle, and we could talk about it here in a little bit, but Olu Fashanu is the prevailing mock pick right now from Penn State. And, I don't think anybody would be really mad about that, but tackles got to be the first priority for me. And I think that they can look at 14, but this is also a tackle rich draft. And so you
Right.
could get somebody on day 2, not saying you don't have to, but then I move to the A tier. I put tight end in here, and I wrote about this because we
Mm-hmm.
both had wide receiver and defensive tackle. I agree. I think wide receiver, you're looking for that possession receiver. You either are going to say this is A.T. Perry, and you're going to trust Coach Keith Williams, Coach Dub, to get him up to the level he needs to be, and put in a lot of trust in a second-year guy. You maybe look at a veteran, but I think for this group, they're very young. I like that about them. Cedric Wilson is the oldest in the group right now at 27, but I
Right.
like the youth. I like it, right? And such. So I think with the wide receiver, at some point, they're going to come away with some because they have 5 on the roster. They're going to need 10 in training camp. If you have 9 picks, just do the math. They're going to get a wide receiver. And so I know people are looking at Brian Thomas Jr. as a possibility. I don't see it happening. I really don't think it. They had all that stuff that went on the social media and stuff. There's reasons behind it. Maybe not what you think is what I'll say about that, but it has more to do with something else, or with more like Jaden Daniels and a visit
Yeah.
happened. So, but anyways, I digress. So defensive tackle I put up there, just because they lost Malcolm Roach, and right now, you got guys like Jack Heflin on the roster that could have more of a role and other things like
Hmm.
that. But I just think when you look at it, and I've been an advocate of this for a long time, is you got to get a game changer at that position, right? I think that
Yeah.
if you could find, everybody wants an Aaron Donald, but everybody's not going to get an Aaron Donald, right? And if you
Hmm.
could get somebody that's in that realm, or somebody that's going to be able to at least stop the run, that's why I like a Devondre Sweat. And I know he had the off-field incident, but this is a guy that could plug it up. He's pretty athletic, and then so I think defensive tackle at some point is going to be drafted, but I could also say that, look, I think that is a prevailing need that the Saints are going to have to look at. And then
Yep.
you look at guard. I mean, you mentioned it. I put guard in the A tier just because, again, you look at James Hurst and they have Nick Saldiveri there, and they're set with Cesar Ruiz, and that's why I put left guard and right guard together. I'm just looking at the guard position, but they have guys like Mark Evans that they're not sure about, Tommy Kramer. I mean, this is unsettling. I mean, they're one injury away from things being really bad, is
Yep.
what I would say. I think that's the biggest thing to take away here. And so, and you got some guys that have been injured, so I think that you got to look at some of that too. But B tier, I put halfback, or halfback, just running back. I say halfback, but tailback, halfback, running back, whatever. But I put running back up here just because the simple fact, I know they got some guys on the roster. I know that they have like the James Robinson and the Jordan Mims, which they were really high on Jordan Mims in the draft process. He went to Buffalo, but they were able to get him. So I'm really intrigued to see more of him and maybe even James Robinson. But I think when you look at it, it just boils down to Kamara and Jamal Williams are in the plans, but do you bring somebody to push them? I think do you look at somebody because AK, and Jamal aren't going to get any younger. And if I hope that they play extremely well. But Kendra is also a guy that you need to have that's to stay healthy too. So I wouldn't be surprised if they look that way. Corner, just because this whole situation, you lost a lot of depth, right? You got Yedem, you got that you lost, but you've essentially got Alante, Paulson, and Marshawn. And of course, as of right now, Marshawn is obviously going to be on this team and is in the plans for 2024, but I still see them looking into that position to potentially find somebody. And in the safety spot, you can never have too many DBs. That's another reason why I think I put it up a little bit. And then edge, what are you going to get with Peyton Turner? That's the biggest thing. What are you going to get with Isaiah Foskey? I mean, for Dennis Allen to talk about at the league meetings that he just needs to cut it loose and stop trying to just learn a defense. I mean, that seems pretty telling that maybe, for him, he's just got to hit that next level, find that next gear, and just try to just play.
Thing, right?
Play football, right? I mean, I think that's all that they're asking for. And so I put QB at C tier and linebackers just because, with linebacker, it's just an area where when you look at special teams and just different things that they're going to do. And some of this, I think about practice squad too, is when you shape out that roster, they're going to have a good bit of linebackers, offensive linemen, and defensive backs. I think that's something to look at. But quarterback, I think they're set. Personally, I could have probably moved it to the D tier. But at the same time, you just never know what this front office is thinking potentially. And, I think the only thing that I'd say, I know what happened with Jake Haener last year was kind of a fluke, but if he gets suspended again, that's not a good thing, because it's going to be a lot more of a suspension. And then obviously we know center doesn't need any assistance because of Eric McCoy. They got two fullbacks, kicker. They brought one in and punter. I just think they're going to go the undrafted route. I mean, I think it's just something that they'll look at, but I think that's something that you look at. So say all that to say, we agree on where tackle is at: wide receiver, defensive tackle, center, fullback, kicker, and strong safety. Center and fullback really don't matter. Kicker doesn't really matter. But
Hey.
I'm saying in terms of the draft that they're not going to do it. But I mean, were you surprised kind of that we kind of agree on some of this big things, or do you maybe differ on some of this stuff too?
I like the stuff that we did that we kind of differed on. I like the fact that, and I think you probably talked me into maybe moving halfback up a little bit more. I was kind of thinking of, Alvin Kamara and, or halfback. See, I'm doing it. Running back. It got me. It's like playing Madden all over again. All of a sudden, the position designations are like all different. Like, what is a left outside linebacker? But so, I was looking at, they have their guys at the top, and Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, and obviously Kendre Miller is going to play a big role in that as well. And I was looking at kind of the roster count of James Robinson and Jordan Mims being a part of the number. But you're right. I mean, and look, they're going to bring in more running backs, as you mentioned. They always do. They always bring in like a bunch of running backs during training camp. But you're right. I mean, what do you do after this year? What do you do after Alvin Kamara? What do you do after Jamal Williams? And I think that's an important thing to always kind of keep in mind. And it's funny how I thought about that for some positions, but not every position. That like when you draft, you're drafting with a 5-year plan in mind. You're not just drafting for 2024. And so with that being the case, that's why a lot of teams will go best player available, because it's not about the need that they have right now. It's, hey, is this somebody that can help our team win? This is somebody that can be a cornerstone of the defense, cornerstone of the offense for years to come, all of that. I also liked sort of the positioning that we both had when it came down to strong safety. I think strong safety is probably like one of the more interesting ones in terms of just having an understanding of like, what exactly is it that the New Orleans Saints need? Because they don't just need a safety, right? Yeah. They need a specific style of safety, so they can come down and, be a run supporter, somebody that can play in the box. Like, this is why you and I continuously go back to the sort of, pie in the sky signing of Justin Simmons, right? Because that's
Still
the
out
type
there.
of yeah, he's still there, and he's the type of player that can do that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, those are the ones that kind of stuck out to me. The ones that we agreed upon, of course, like tackle, wide receiver, defensive tackle, like those all feel like okay, that's where the New Orleans Saints could really do some work over the course of the draft and undrafted free agency.
Yeah, the only thing I really didn't touch on it was tight end, and again, I kind of really I
Yeah.
wrote about it because again, I wrote about it today and just saying the fact that if they're at 14, I think this is a big thing. If they're at 14 and Brock Bowers is still available, it's going to be really hard to turn that down because again, he's a generational type of talent in a Clint Kubiak offense. I mean, just seeing just numbers and touchdowns and just all sorts of possibilities pop up. But I don't think Bowers is the only guy. Like I really like Jatavian Sanders from
Hmm.
Texas. I like Theo Johnson late. I think his stock
There's
is
my
going
guy.
all over the board too. That's your guy. But
Yeah.
tight end is essentially you got two of the guys that were on the practice squad last year, Tommy Hudson and Michael Jacobson, and then you
Hmm.
got Taysom who saw career highs in receptions and yards and such and all that stuff last year. And you've got Foster, who's more of the dirty work guy, but it's one of those things where is Juwan going to take the next leap that they need, or do they need to inject somebody else in there? And if you're in a situation where Brock Bowers is available, do you pull that trigger?
Yeah, it's interesting. I am typically anti Brock Bowers in the first round for the New Orleans Saints because I don't think that the Saints roster is good enough to take a luxury pick at a tight end who will take 1 or 2 years to, find a role. If he takes 1 or 2 years to find a role. And that's just the typical situation with tight ends. But obviously, Brock Bowers is not a typical tight end. So, if you're able to draft him and let him do what it is that he does and not try to get him to do, be an inline blocker and all this other stuff, then all of a sudden, like, okay, now we're talking. But I did do a mock draft this past Monday. I did 3 mock drafts on one show, John. That's how much I love mock drafts.
Wow.
Um,
All
one of
right.
the mock drafts, yeah, one of the mock drafts, I wanted to do one. I wanted to do like, let's do a Brock Bowers mock. Like I sit here and I poo-poo
Yeah.
the idea of Brock Bowers, but what would it look like if they actually did it? And the fact of the matter is that like they can and they can still walk away with really, really good offensive tackles to help
Mm-hmm.
the rest of their needs because they could go with a Brock Bowers at 14 and then a Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU at 45 or a Patrick Paul out of Houston or something like that. A Javon Foster out of Missouri at 150 could
I like
potentially
him
be an
too.
option for them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So there's a lot of real good options out there to where if they decided like, you know what, we are going to take the best player on the board, even though it's at a position that makes no sense for their needs, because they can still address their needs in, like you mentioned, a very, very tackle rich class here in 2024.
Yeah, and there's places where the position groups aren't that good, like halfback and tailback, running back, whatever you want to call it. It's not that good of a draft. There's actually, I think that's the only position that there are no projected first round picks this year. I think it's all day 2 and 3 for running
Yeah,
backs. I mean, that's just
linebackers
kind
there
of how
too.
it is. Yeah, linebackers are a pretty weak class too. And so again, you look at how that shapes out. I think it's going to be fascinating to see if Mickey and Jeff Ireland and Dennis see it kind of that way as well. But this is the big thing here that everybody's got to remember is the Saints have got to get this right. They just have to because they're
Mhm.
3 years removed from the playoffs. The pressure is up on Dennis Allen, I feel like, and even though it may not feel like it to some of the fans, but this is a team that's expected to win because you got the quarterback, you just changed out the offensive staff, you have done all this stuff, you just locked up 2 of your big core, or like you locked up a lot of your veteran players to a 2-year run, basically. Like this is a 2-year window. Atlanta got better. Tampa's doing Tampa things, and I think they're still going to be good. And Carolina, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like little brother at this point, you know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so you just got to nail this draft. And so I think if you look at it, where do they need the most help? Is it their defense or is it their offense? And I feel like it's their offense. And so the
Agreed.
first 2 picks, I think that's where you got to go is your offense. Defensively, I think they've got enough there as of right now. Of course, there's unknowns like Chase Young. When's he going to come back into the mix? But I really feel good about that linebacker room. I feel good about the secondary, even if they don't have a clear cut starter at strong safety, but I could
Yeah,
see
I
a
agree
Justin
there.
Simmons. I could see them adding and stuff, but you know, it behooves the Saints that they have got to get this right. I mean, it does. That's the biggest thing is they can't afford to miss or mess this up. And I'm going to get your take on this, and you can continue on. But Kenneth asked, obviously, big supporter of Locked On Saints. Whoop whoop on
Whoop,
that.
whoop.
And then it says we get the fun question: how realistic is it that the Saints move back in the draft? It seems like the right thing to do for the team future.
I would say very unlikely. Only based upon the history of the team, right? Like John, they moved back twice in 2006, again in 2007, and they have not moved back in the draft again since 2007. And there's an easy sort of, and Mickey has talked about this before, in pressers and things like that. There's an easy sort of reason for it is that they feel that if you can get a key player wherever you're selecting, if you're moving back, you're getting two lesser players than that player, more than
Mm,
likely. And so you're kind of conceding to the idea of taking a lesser player. And so, or two lesser players. And so I think the biggest thing is going to be who's on the board when they're considering trading down and what's the offer that's being given to them. It's a big, big difference if you have, a quarterback that some team is trying to get to, which wouldn't be the case at 14 for New Orleans, but maybe could be the case at 45, depending upon, who has selected their quarterback, who hasn't, all these other things, who's still on the board. Like if a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix falls into the second round and the Saints are on the board at 45 and somebody within, 5 selections or so is calling them up and saying, hey, we'll give you this pick to move up those 5 spots. And you can conceivably move back 5 spots and still get the player that you were targeting potentially. But if not, then what's the real use in doing it? Right. And so
yep.
I agree that it gives you the additional building blocks to be able to build towards your future, but we don't know necessarily if that is the strategy that would actually be good for their future until we know who was on the board when they make the decision to trade down and then see who they select with the additional assets. That's where things become a little bit tricky. So I would say it's unlikely that they trade down. Not at all impossible, though, because again, it's the NFL and we never say anything's impossible.
Yeah, it's just not their MO, right? But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean never say never, right? But
Right.
I think
Doesn't
you
mean it's not
bring
a
up
good idea.
points. Correct, correct. And I mean, you bring up valid points. And I just think that, this is a team that doesn't have a third or a fourth rounder right now, right? And some of the things that's not going to stick, first of all. They're going to find a way to get in the third or the fourth round. They just are. And I was looking at, right now, I'm looking at a lot of the trades from last year, and a lot of them for the first round picks. Some people added on just a fourth rounder to get a couple of spots up. I mean, it really was underwhelming, and even some of the trades to get in the third or the fourth. And Saints have a good bit. I think they have all the first 6 rounds of picks next year, but you could technically trade a third next year to get into the third. And you might have to trade a fifth with it or something like that. But there are things that you can do to dip into next year. But some of the trades that come out of, I'm writing an article on it, so it'll come out. But it's not as much as you would think. And I think they're going to get in the third. I think they're going to get into the fourth. They're not going to have all those 5th round picks. I just don't see it
Yeah.
happening.
There's
But
no way they're taking 4 players in the 5th round.
I mean, great if you do, but I just don't know. That's a cursed round too. That's not really been a good round for the Saints too. But I just don't see them ever trading down unless the offer was just something ridiculous that they just couldn't pass up. And I'm
Yeah.
talking like a haul. If
Yeah.
somebody's saying, "We'll give you our first, trade a couple positions back," and then maybe it's a lower second round pick, or maybe it's a third rounder that you really wanted to get up and pick up. So it's possible, but I just don't see them trading back. We always talk about it every year, and I just don't think this is the year. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Good question here. We talked about Devondre Sweat, the DWI. Is this going to hurt his draft stock? I mean, he's been on visits still. It's not like the
Yeah.
guy's not going to take visits or anything,
What
but
posted bond and then went straight to a visit. Like it
yeah,
was crazy.
yeah. I mean, this stuff comes out all the time, right? I mean, people are gonna have something like if you crapped your pants in kindergarten, they're gonna find out at this point. And it's just gonna come out on social media. I mean, that's just how it happens. I mean, this is just
No
the
one
type
tell
of
anyone
society
about
we.
that. All right. No
Yeah,
one tell anyone about that. You weren't supposed to hear about that. John was
yeah.
not supposed to say that about me
All right,
online out loud. All right.
my bad, my bad. I didn't go too close, man. Man, oh man. But I just think this always happens. This always happens. You got something. I mean, it's unfortunate, that people put themselves in situations. It's like you're about to make a bunch of money, and this is a difference between you making a good bit of money versus not as much money. And so for you to do something like that, I don't know if a character concern is a problem now, but I think something that Jeff Ireland told us at the Senior Bowl, there are certain things that they do look at that automatically disqualify players that they will draft. You know what I mean?
hmm Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that it's not just the incident and the news report. The reason
Right.
why teams will have somebody like that on a visit is so that they can effectively explain their side of it, or they'll
Yeah.
go to that player and then be able to do that too. So it's what we see, which is the incident, the news report, all that other stuff. But what we don't see is the conversation that takes place between that player or that player's representatives and the club. So it's really going to be that stuff that determines whether or not he falls more than the actual incident itself. The one specific example differently, I mean, not one specific, there are examples otherwise of that, and it depends upon the nature of whatever the crime is. This could be that kind of crime for some teams, might not be for other teams. So it just kind of depends upon the way that they see this and how they look at it. But more than likely, for a lot of teams that are going to be selecting and that want to build teams that are going to win, and that's their first and foremost priority, it's going to be all about the explanation and what their conversations are with that prospect or with that prospect's people.
Yeah, and look, this is the time where people are going to leak information and talk information like to do things. I think about what happened to A.T. Perry last year. You remember
Yeah.
that? Like he was supposed to
Yeah.
be a
He was the
J2
one who
pick.
like told us about it. It was like, it was
He's
so
like, they said I
surprising.
had character concerns, and he's like, I have no idea. And this guy is like super nice, got a lovely family and such. I mean, I just don't get it. Like AT's a really good guy, and I I don't know, but the Saints they made up and then they got him in the sixth round. So I mean, you can't complain. But guys like that, you just can't believe that they fall. And I don't know. I just don't. I'm not a scout. I'm not a talent evaluator like that. I don't know. And we've heard stories from interviews and people like it being the most awkward thing imaginable, without getting too specific. And it's probably uncomfortable that you're getting asked all sorts of information by the people who could potentially draft you to know if it's a smokescreen or not.
Yep. Yeah, you just never know. And then also like with these guys, like let's not forget that they're also this is not in response. This is not in reference to the Tavondre Sweat situation. That is now we are no longer talking about that. But like with these situations, like these guys are young. And
Mm,
so when they get into situations sometimes where there is an all awkward question that's asked or a question that's meant to put them, kind of put them to the test or whatever, the capacity to fail that test at 18 years or not 18 years old, but the capacity to fail that test at 20 years old, 21 years old is greater than that capacity to fail that test at 24, 25 years old. Like, let's just be real and everything.
yeah.
And so I do think that there is some of that too, to where, sometimes these guys might get cornered into a situation to where they either like say, oh, well, I had like this stuff that I was struggling with because they're trying to show that they overcame it. But instead, all the organization hears is that they were struggling with something. I don't know. It can be really weird sometimes. Like it can be a very uncomfortable situation doing some of those interviews. And especially when you get like 15 minutes at the Senior Bowl
Yeah.
and 20 minutes with four different people for one organization at the combine, like it gets even tougher to sort of communicate what it is that you want to communicate in that time when you're not trained yet on how to communicate those things. It can be really challenging from ways that are far beyond the way that we usually talk about football.
Yeah, it's like Data Palooza from 40-Year-Old Virgin. I mean, that's what it
Yes.
reminds me of. I mean, it's just like a
Yes.
round robin type thing. I mean, it's just that's just how it kind of goes. You go from one thing to another. And look, it's other coaches too. Like I remember we were at the Senior Bowl. Joe Woods, he said one night he had 10 interviews he had to go do that night,
Yep.
and so they are gathering as much information as they can to make the most informed decision. And sometimes you get it right. Like your valuation on Jordan Howden or Brian Brzee, and then sometimes you just don't. get it right, which
Rick Leonard.
there's plenty of things. Oh my God. Why'd you have to do that? Golly, that was the worst. Or Tommy Stevens, that was the other one.
That
Remember,
was
that was the second
wild.
Taysom Hill coming. That was, and the Panthers
Yes.
tried to get him too. And so, yeah, that was a weird one as well. But I
Yeah.
had too many different ones. But look, let's, because we're kind of winding down here, Ross. The top 30 visits are happening now. So a
Yes.
lot of players are coming to the organization or coming to the building in Metairie. They're coming for official top 30 visits. Briefly explain what that means. And there's actually a couple of prospects or a prospect that you really like that's visited Saints. Talk about them.
Yes. So when it comes to top 30 visit, let me say this real quick. Top 30 visit does not mean that that player is considered a top 30 player on a team's draft board. Okay.
Correct.
So teams will take their time to be able to say, we want to have this top 30 visit with a player that might be a 5th round prospect.
Yep.
They can do that. However, they want to utilize those resources. They get 30 of them. That's where the number comes from. So just to keep that in mind, these top 30 visits give you an opportunity to have a player come to your facility, tour the facility, work out. You can kind of put them through sort of, you can have them redo things from the combine. You can have them run routes. You can have them do things that they didn't do at the combine. Sometimes you'll hear about teams bringing in like a running back on a top 30 visit, but then having them run routes from the slot or from, out wide and things like that, just to kind of see what else they can do on defense. Oh, he's a pass rusher, but let's see him drop back into coverage, little things like that. Even just changing their plant foot, if they're a pass rusher that usually rushes from the right side, get him over on the left side, see how he changed, how he does with his, plant foot being his right foot instead, or lead foot being his right foot instead, things like that. So it gives you an opportunity to do all that. Individual meetings with all of the position coaches, things like that too. Anyway, so that's what a top 30 visit is. They come to you as opposed to you going to them. So one of the recent top 30 visits that was announced thanks to U Stadium was Western Kentucky wide receiver Malachi Corley, who is far and away one of my favorite prospects in this year's draft, along with guys like Tyrone Tracy, Trey Taylor, and like Theo Johnson and a couple others. But Malachi Corley is a guy that averaged over 9 yards. How do I say this? Over 9 yards after catch per reception last year, and avoided more than 39% of tackles that came his way. So not only was he picking up yards after catch, he was doing it through traffic and through tackles and things like that. 5'11", 215-pound guy that kind of turns into a running back when you get the ball in his hands. Everything that the Saints kind of hoped that Kawan Baker would be when they drafted him in the 7th. Yeah, when they drafted him in the 7th round years ago, Malachi Corley has already proven to be in a really, really bad offense over in Western Kentucky. And so I really, really like what a guy like Malachi Corley could bring to this offense, especially with the Clint Kubiak fit. He's got that Deebo Samuel type role experience. They can play him out of the backfield, out of the slot, out wide, line him up in line. They can hand the ball to him, throw the ball to him. They can run screens again. Welcome back the screen pass to the city of New Orleans, all these other things. So I really, really like him. And in fact, one last thing on him. If you took screen passes out of his game last year, he was still the 2nd ranking wide receiver in this year's draft class in yards after catch per reception. So his yards after catch per reception were not bolstered by screen passes. It was getting him the ball down the field or in the middle of the field or in the short and intermediate areas and letting him go out there and literally run through tackles, because that's the type of runner he is with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, it's like playing rookie mode on Madden. I mean, you just do everything.
Truck stick.
Juke, and then they're like,
yes.
You just roll down, and they're like, oh, I guess I'll try to. But you mentioned the top 30 vids. I like Corley too. I think he's somebody to keep an eye on too. And just there's so many different gems in this draft to uncover. There's D2 prospects. There's all these other ones that you can look at too. But the top 30 visits, they do matter. And for those who are like, well, they don't draft them. I mean, Kendre Miller, Jordan Howden were 2 of those visits last year. They had Devin A-Chain in here last year. They had Aiden O'Connell. They had a whole bunch of really big, high profile guys. So it's not like we just bring these in and we just don't ever draft them. I mean, they had 2 of them last year, which ended up panning out. And so, Kendre had the injury part. And I think that was really one of the things that you wanted to see is where are you at from a physical standpoint. And at the time, I mean, if you had Jamal Williams, you had AK. So it's like, we're not expecting you to come in here and do stuff from day one. They kind of have like a clear plan and vision for, Kendre, and that's kind of things that they can obviously convey in that and with the draft process and such. But top 30 visits, you're going to see a lot of them. There's a lot of different prospects from all over. Some that you're like, who, and some they're like, why, and stuff. But it's just going to happen. But it's not a proven science that the Saints are going to just draft guys that they meet with. Coincidentally enough, what was it? At Perry didn't meet with the Saints last year.
That's right. Didn't
He
talk to
didn't.
him
He had
one bit.
no talks with them, and they drafted him. Maybe they didn't think they could get him. I don't know, but that's just one of many examples where it's just not an exact science. So, but man, draft is coming. We've got more draft coverage coming, and we're gonna probably end up pulling a mock together, right? We're gonna be doing a bunch of different things. Look, I don't have anything against mocks now. I'm fine with doing as much mocks,
free
as
agency's
many
over.
mocks.
Mock
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. You want to do one every day? Let's do one every day. Let's talk about it and such. So, Ross, talk about some of the things coming up on Locked On and anything that you got in the works right now.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing that I'm most proud of that I have in the works right now, I'll tell you a little bit about, is a write-up that I have coming over at Saints News Network on the Saints Girls High School Flag Football League.
Yes.
I'm so excited. I went to the first weekend of those games, and it was super competitive. It was a huge crowd. Like, there was so much excitement. It was really, really cool. So I'm going to be tracking that sort of initiative all through its May 4th championship. So beyond the draft as well. So I hope that you'll join in on and check out a little bit of that coverage. It's not going to be like gamers or anything, but just about like kind of how this whole thing is proceeding and how and the impact that it's having on some of these young athletes. Because it's really, really cool to see. There's one team that is full of like dancers and artists and like arts kids and stuff like that. Like, it's just so cool to see just another avenue for the youth to succeed in the city. So really, really cool. I hope that you'll take the time to check that out. And then over at Locked On Saints, I've got a two episode series coming out about the wide zone offense. So first, take a look at the fundamentals of it, what to expect different from what you saw last year going into 2024 from this year. And then the next episode, which will come out on Thursday, will be a little bit more of the nitty gritty percentages of like zone run versus man run and what's, expected to be achieved and play calling tendencies and things like that. So excited about all of that. And there'll be some accompanying written pieces to go along with all that, of course, over at Saints News as well. John, what you got working on?
Well, it's bland as everything compared to that. I can't really top that. I mean, we're just if you follow Saints News, I mean, we're going through all the draft outlooks. That's really where I'm at right now. Is it's all talking about what would they draft, making the case for drafting a position versus not making the case, and then also looking at a cloud of prospects. So who could they take in day one, who could they take in day two, day three, and even undrafted free agents. This is where you forget about guys from FCS or HBCU or D2 and stuff like that. Even the tight end group, it gets me excited to think about some of the guys out there, guys from South Dakota State, Furman, or Florida A&M. I mean, there's just all sorts of guys that you can look into and stuff. So looking at that, and then I also mentioned that I was looking at the trade value piece, and I think that's going to be a really fun one just to see. It's not going to be as hard to get in the third round or fourth round as people may think, but they are going to probably have to dip into the cookie jar for next year. But at this point, I think it's something that's merited and worth it. So, those are the two big things that's coming. Just continuing that and got our draft primer that's going to be coming, and I'll be doing some draft profiles. It's just draft everything, right? Draft and draft. We're going to put draft on you until you're sick of it, which will be probably the next month now because they got, undrafted after this. But man, time flies always, Ross. Always when we're on here, man. So I just appreciate you joining us or joining up here and sharing this time and stuff. But give your parting shots, thoughts, and remarks.
My parting shots. Who can I take a shot at? Oh, J. Cole. I'll take a shot at J. Cole. Don't ever apologize for a diss rap. What are you doing? What are you doing? Get out of my face. I told y'all J. Cole was trash. I've been saying that forever. So that's my parting shot.
Yeah, mine would just be like, Pels, get your stuff together.
That'd be my thing. Come on, man. Everybody's been waiting for the Pelicans to get back into the playoffs and stuff. Don't come up short. Yeah, stop playing. Stop playing. So, at any rate, that's going to do it for us tonight. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button on Second and Saints. We are trying to get that drive to 500. We're getting closer and closer and closer, guys. We really appreciate you spending the time with us. You could be doing 1,000 other things. You could be listening to other pods and tuning into other shows, but appreciate you spending the time with us. We'll be back soon, very, very, very soon. So that'll do it for us tonight. John Hendricks on behalf of Ross Jackson. Thanks for tuning in to Second and Saints. Have a good night.